In today's video, I'm going to be talking a little bit about inks, or at least what I know for the last 8 months of collecting fountain pens and ink. This by no means is a very comprehensive, uh, you know, delving into the topic of inks. It's just a quick overview, or at least what I've learned over the last 8 months. So first of all, what is ink? It's obviously a liquid, right? It's a liquid that you put into your fountain pen, and you typically get them in bottles like this. And that's nice and all. Obviously, you get inks in different colors, and that's pretty much what I knew when I kind of entered the fountain pen hobby. However, what I didn't realize is how important the relationship between a pen, or rather a nib, was with ink, right? So if you put particular ink into a pen with a particular nib, you might get a different effect if you used other combinations of ink in that same pen. The other component in this triangle, you can call it the pen, ink, and paper triangle, right, is obviously paper. The paper that you use would affect how that particular ink would perform with a particular nib. So it's like a pretty much a relationship between these three components, right, to kind of put it very simply. And let's start off by talking about what inks you should put into your fountain pens. So first of all, I have a couple of different boxes of inks down here. And when you buy inks for your fountain pen, the first thing that you'll have to kind of be careful about is, only put fountain pen ink into your fountain pens, right? On the table down here, I actually have a bottle of what they call manga ink, and I use this for with my dip pens. However, I would be very careful, or I would advise never to put this into a fountain pen due to the fact that it dries and it might clog up your feet and do generally all sorts of not very nice things to your could be a very expensive fountain pen. So that's the first point about inks. Choose fountain pen inks only. Second thing to be aware of is the fact that there are, since ink is pretty much a chemical that's in liquid form, there are different viscosities or different degrees of lubrication in inks that will cause them to have an effect of, when you pick up a pen and then you start writing with it, effect of actually for you to kind of say, oh, this is a very dry nib, a very dry pen, right? And a lot of that is actually influenced not by the pen itself, but because of the ink you chose to put into your pen, right? So if you've seen my earlier videos for fountain pens, you'll probably note that I typically start off, especially for a brand new pen, by putting in this particular ink, which is Waterman Mysterious Blue. And the reason why I always do that is, I want to kind of judge that nib and that pen, from a common base. As I mentioned in my previous videos, this particular ink by Waterman is known as what they call a wet ink. I know that it kind of lubricates well, and it flows well in pretty much any fountain pen that I might choose. So with that as a benchmark, after I've tried out that new pen with this particular ink, benchmark ink, I can then kind of choose what subsequent inks I would put into that pen. If it was a very wet or very like what they say, a gushing nib that kind of gushes when the ink comes out, it actually doesn't really gush. I mean, that's a term that everyone uses. I might choose to kind of only use drier inks. For example, this is a Pelikan 4001. It always has a reputation of being a rather dry ink. Sheaffer inks also have a reputation of being dry. However, I can't give you a comprehensive list of what inks are wet and dry. You probably have to do a little bit of research. Pretty much, out of the box, I mean, the boxes of ink that I have down here, Tobacco Sunburst by Diamine, this particular one is known to be relatively dry, and my use of it kind of substantiates that claim. Parker Quink is also known to be kind of dry. However, best thing to do a little bit of research in that particular ink that you want to buy, so you would know whether or not you're putting a wet ink or dry ink into your pens. So that's the second point, being knowing the difference between wet and dry inks. Kind of tying into that second point is the concept of what inks should you buy, right? I don't have any basis to kind of tell you what colored inks to buy, but I would kind of advise for most beginners, or at least that's what I did, right? When I started off, I bought a black ink and a blue ink to kind of start off. And why did I do this is it pretty much covered the basis of what I was using the kind of the pens for. I was using typically fine nibs or medium nibs, and I was writing on pretty crappy paper, and in that case, I wanted a very fine line that, regardless of the paper I use, would show up very nicely on that particular notepad that I used. So generally, I would say if you have never bought or you have never gotten a bottle of ink before, pretty safe bet to either start with a blue ink. I personally prefer blue black rather than a traditional blue, or you can choose a black ink, right? So continuing on that topic, I want to show you a little bit about this relationship between the pen, the nib, and paper. So I have Rhodia down here, right, as you can see, and I have inked up this pen. It's a Jinhao X750, I believe. And this is, if I use it has pretty much I would say a medium fine, right? So this is a Jinhao X750, and I think it's a medium fine, right? So if you were to kind of look at this nib, and if you look at the kind of resulting effect of that ink that I use, which is fairly light ink, right, which is Inaho by Pilot, and you would compare it with another pen, which is my recently bought Montblanc, right? So this is the Montblanc, and it's the P145, and this is in medium. So this pen has a kind of a reputation of being kind of a gusher in a way, and might not be very obvious when it comes down to paper, but you can actually kind of tell that the Montblanc actually brings out a different shade in that Inaho fairly light golden ink. So that's the impact of kind of this triangle down here. I mean, obviously it's the same paper, but a different nib with the same ink would produce different effects. Maybe I should have chosen a finer pen, but I think you get the idea that if you use a very fine pen, we won't have that kind of different dynamic or the different shade in the ink once it gets laid down. There is also another dimension to ink, which is called sheen, which is kind of like the shiny bits if you slant your writing at one angle. But we'll probably get into that topic another day. So we've covered quite a lot in terms of inks. My last probably point about inks, or my last observation from what I've learned about inks, is kind of a funny one. You know, when I began using fountain pens, I tended to match the color of the ink to the pen. So for example, this particular TWSBI Eco is gray, and I tended to just put gray ink in the pen, and it having a transparent barrel down here kind of let me know that it was a gray ink and so on. But you really don't have to match ink color to the pen that you use, right? So looking at this particular pen, which is another Eco, but this time I've put in kind of a maroon ink. I believe it's Oxblood. And you know, it looks perfectly fine. In fact, the contrast of different colored inks with your main body, or the color of the body of that pen you're using, makes it look kind of mysterious, and I kind of like the contrast actually compared to matching inks with your pens. So that's also another discovery that I had in my fountain pen journey ink-wise. So that kind of concludes my kind of rambling video today. Obviously, there are a lot more topics about inks which I haven't spoken about, and if you are interested, I can create another subsequent part 2 of ink observations. So again, thanks for watching the channel. Stay safe, and I will see you in the next one. Bye bye.